Hi, Bethlehem, and welcome back to our small group study, Living Life Together. At Bethlehem, we say that we are a Christian community that glorifies God. What does that mean? What does it mean to be a Christian community? To be a Christian community means that we are a group of people committed to following Jesus. If we are following Jesus, that requires us to live the way that Jesus lived. In John chapter 15, verses 9 through 17, Jesus taught his disciples that we are to love the way that he loved. So if we're going to be people who follow Jesus, if we're truly going to be a Christian community, one of the requirements is that we love one another the way that Jesus has loved us. So how has Jesus loved? In week number 2 of this study, we talked about the fact that Jesus loved generously. That if we are going to love one another, we can't just look at doing the minimum, but rather we should seek to truly bless the other person. In week number 3, we talked about the reality of loving those who are on the outside, loving those who the rest of society has rejected, and finding and making a place for them within our community, accepting them and serving them and helping them along. This week we're talking about sharing the truth in love. So have you ever had one of those difficult conversations? You know, those conversations where you have to go to another person and tell them, hey, you're being a jerk. You need to stop this. Or you're being destructive. You need to change your behavior. Those are hard conversations to have. And like myself, like most people, don't like to have confrontation. We want to avoid those types of things as much as possible. But if we're going to love one another, there are moments, there are times when we have to share the truth in love. And in our text that we're looking at today, we see that Jesus had such a conversation. In John chapter 5, verses 1 through 15, this is what we read. Afterward, Jesus returned to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holy days. Inside the city, near the sheep gate, was the pool of Bethesda, with 5 covered porches. Crowds of sick people, blind, lame, or paralyzed, lay on porches. One of the men lying there had been sick for 38 years. When Jesus saw him and knew he had been ill for a long time, he asked him, "Would you like to get well?" "I can't, sir," the sick man said, "for I have no one to put me into the pool when the water bubbles up. Someone else always gets there ahead of me." Jesus told him, "Stand up, pick up your mat, and walk." Instantly the man was healed. He rolled up his sleeping mat and began walking. But this miracle happened on the Sabbath, so the Jewish leaders objected. They said to the man who was cured, "You can't work on the Sabbath. The law doesn't allow you to carry that sleeping mat." But he replied, "The man who healed me told me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" "Who said such a thing as that?" they demanded. The man didn't know, for Jesus had disappeared into the crowd. But afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and told him, "Now you are well, so stop sinning or something even worse may happen to you." Then the man went and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had healed him. So here there was this man, and he was in a tough spot. He'd been ill. He had some sort of sickness, and he had it for a long time. And so he couldn't work, he couldn't really live life. And he was here at this pool hoping to get better. And here comes Jesus. And Jesus has some compassion on him. He has mercy on him and says, "Hey, do you want to be well?" And right then we see some insight into this man, because he starts to make some excuses like, "Hey, yeah, I'd like to be well, but I can't get into the pool. I can't do this." And so Jesus heals him. And the man does what Jesus says. He picks up his mat and he walks, and he then has some confrontation with the religious leaders. And then Jesus finds him again. And what Jesus says, I find just very interesting, and because he seems to be very harsh with him, and says, hey, you need to stop sinning, otherwise something worse than this illness could happen to you. Now, this man might have thought being sick for such a long time was the worst thing in the world that could have happened, but Jesus is saying, no, something worse. You can be separated from God if you don't change the way you live. The man was physically healed, but it appears that his heart was still hard, that there still were some changes that needed to be made. And so Jesus has compassion, and he loves this man, and he serves him. And yet at the appropriate time, Jesus says, hey, this is a reality check for you. This is what you need to do. And that's hard for us. That's hard for us to do, to have those conversations, to get real, to say, hey, this is your reality. But if we truly love somebody, not only are we going to serve them and help them, but we're going to point out those areas in their life that they need to change. And so here's the kind of the question I want you to think about as you discuss tonight. How can we have these difficult situations? Or how can we share the truth in love? How can we do that? So have a good time discussing, and we'll see you again next week.